Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to Circle of Fellows, the monthly IABC broadcast featuring a panel of fellows discussing a communication topic of interest to communicators everywhere. I am Shel Holtz. I am an IABC Fellow. I am also Director of Internal Communications at WebCore, which is a commercial builder in California. And I am joined so far by half of the fellows who are scheduled to participate in this session. So I guess it is currently a semicircle of fellows. But I will ask my two colleagues to introduce themselves. Ritzi, why don't you let everybody know about yourself?
Thanks, Shel. I'm Ritzi Ronquillo. I'm over here in Manila, Philippines. I'm with the IABC Philippines chapter, and very happy to be an IABC fellow, always in good company. And I do consultancy now for strategic public relations and for business communication. So my background related to this circle, that's why I signed up for it, was because I used to work with the basic unit of governance here in the Philippines. It's called the barangays. So it's where you really do volunteer work, and then later on branched out into corporate social responsibility and sustainability. So that's why the topic of this circle is very close to my heart.
Great. Can't wait to hear your contributions and your insights, Ritzi. Brad, you're up next.
Well, thank you, Shel. Brad Whitworth coming your way from wine country in Northern California. I am an IABC Fellow, past chair of IABC. The SCMP is Strategic Communications Management Professional. And if you don't know what that is, check it out on the GCCC website, which is the Global Corporate Communications Council. I'm actually the chair of that this year, which is an IABC initiative. And I have a passion for the whole topic around corporate social responsibility as well, Ritzi. I, for many years, led when I was at Hewlett-Packard, the philanthropy and outreach program for Asia Pacific and Latin America. So some hands-on experience in addition to just a fascinating passion for watching this area, this growth, this practice sort of grow and develop in organizations over the past couple of decades.
Well, thanks, Brad. Rajeev and Jim have joined us, so we are a full circle. Rajeev, can you introduce yourself to those who are watching?
Yes, thank you, Shel. It's very nice to get into this circle again for a rich discussion on social responsibility. It's a topic that has come to the fore more so during the pandemic, and suddenly made us realize what is our responsibility towards nature, what is our responsibility towards the world and to the communities, to our employees, and to everybody else in the world, and to ourselves also. As far as my personal life goes, I have had a military career for about 28 years. And then I pursued my PhD in organizational communication at Texas A&M as a Fulbright doctoral fellow. And then I worked for a very large Indian corporate, the Tata Group, which has been which is more than 150 years old, establishment, and been very heavily involved in corporate social responsibility. The holding of Tata Group, 66% of the holding of Tata Group is held by trusts, and 66% of the profit that the group earns goes towards social responsibility. So it's in the culture of that Tata Group, and so I also decided to write a book on social responsibility, which should be published this year. And as I said, the pandemic has brought all this, agenda to the top very much. And I'm now looking forward to a very rich discussion with our colleagues, and I hope everybody enjoys it, those who are listening in. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Rajeev. Jim, good to see you. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. As a sort of a latecomer this morning. Now, my name is Jim Lukaszewski, and I'm a fellow in IABC, and always appreciate being included in the podcasts and the conversations that are going on. This one's particularly interesting to me because I've gone back to graduate school, and there's a program in Minnesota called MAPL. It's the Masters in Advocacy and Political Leadership, and my original baccalaureate came from the same school, and my major was in political communication, and that's where my career started, actually. So this is particularly interesting to me because Minnesota is one of, I think, 45 states that has enacted laws in 2013 for establishing public benefit corporations, and we could probably get into that a little bit in our discussion. But it's an interesting advanced idea about having these corporations where their mantra is essentially doing business for good first, and the rest of it comes later. So this is something new, although some of the fundamental concepts really have been around for some time. So, but this is clearly an emerging, powerful concept. A lot of people interested in it, active in it. And it's just going to get more powerful going forward, I think. So this is a very timely conversation.
Terrific. Well, I'm glad you're all here, and just want to let listeners know, people who are watching in real time, that if you have questions, comments, or observations, please share them. The chat function is enabled on the YouTube channel, and you can also send a tweet using the hashtag COF67 for Circle of Fellows episode 67. I'll be monitoring both of those, and I will bring your questions and your observations to the panel. Let's get started. There has been a lot of movement in the area of corporate purpose in the last few years. In 2020, the Business Roundtable in the United States kind of sent shockwaves across business when they said we are going to stop focusing primarily on shareholders and instead have a list of stakeholders that organizations are responsible to. Shareholders are just one of them. We've also seen the emergence of ESG, environmental, social, and governance within organizations. I've heard some people say that's replacing corporate social responsibility, CSR, which has a reputation of being I hate to use this term, but just PR. We tick the boxes off on CSR. We've made X dollars of donation. We've done X number of volunteer activities. We're done. We've done our CSR thing. So again, my first question is there a significant shift that you have seen toward more serious corporate social responsibility that is linked or connected to this idea of purpose?
Well,
You're right.
I mentioned in my comment, the most tangible activity we've really seen is this rush of the states to begin to establish these special corporations, public benefit corporations that require special legislation, but it institutionalizes these newer concepts. They talk about people, profits, and the planet. That's how they sort of characterize it. It's sort of based on the notion of 10 or 12 years ago, the triple bottom line idea. And what I find interesting about this effort going forward is that we're a lot of this, my impression is we're sort of like dressing it in new language, but I'm really intrigued to see what actually happens as a result of it. And I say the same thing about the Business Roundtable exercise. I'm still looking for really tangible change and movement in that direction. The public benefit corporations are seeing companies try to form these organizations or their corporations under this basis, and there's about 3,000 in the United States. There's actually several hundred outside the United States as well. but they're slow to emerge, and most of them at the moment are startups, smaller companies, cool ideas, and things like that. But they're very profoundly committed to this concept of doing good as their primary goal. And maybe we get into this a little bit. I want to talk a bit about some of the defects I see in some of this stuff actually happening.
I'll make a note.
Here in the Philippines, our Securities and Exchange Commission has issued a directive that all publicly listed companies have to issue every year a sustainability report. So you can imagine all the top corporations and anyone who's on the stock market has to come up with one. It has moved businesses actually to now look at their operations because, sustainability, we know, should not be an add-on. It should be well embedded into the value system, into all the processes and all their practices. But it has now moved companies to really come up with frameworks, to now come up with materiality assessments, and to get top management to buy in. And because it's a requirement, the thing that they did was for the first 3 years, there may be a little bit more easing in of some businesses. Some businesses are ahead, like multinationals usually are ahead. They have a pretty good framework. They already cover the human capital, circular economy, and aside from just the climate change and all. And then they've already embedded it into their financial products and services. In fact, I know of one multinational where I used to be with. We had our global targets brought down to region and then to country, and I was the one who had to tell all the functional groups, this is our country target up to 2030. Then we work backwards and get it done. The next step would be the dream, the aspiration would be all associations would be coming up with sustainability reports. This really gets one thinking into, am I making an impact or am I just coming out with stories that are one time big time? But when you have a pandemic and in a country, you're really going to need sustainability in its rawest, truest, most sustainable sense.
Rajeev, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So as Shel brought out correctly about the Business Roundtable decision in August 2019, it was that after they shifted the stance, I think in August 2019, and they announced this modern standard for corporate responsibility, advocating the value creation for all stakeholders. It was after 4 decades. Now, the debate about stakeholder primacy and the shareholder primacy has been on for a very long time. And we are very happy to note that the roundtable has taken this decision. What we need to be careful about is how does that statement get converted into action? Because many companies fail and many companies adopt greenwashing also. So we have to be a little careful in seeing that the implementation of such an intention goes right down to the bone, and that's very important. And there is increasing pressure on the business houses, not only from the investors. For example, the investors, you have Larry Fink of BlackRock, the largest money manager, who wrote a letter to all the CEOs, and he said that every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. So those are very good steps, and it is happening not only in the US, it's happening in Europe, it's happening in the developing countries, even here today in India. For example, we have the Stock Exchange Board, which has made it mandatory for companies to give a sustainable report, as well as to show how they are reducing the carbon footprint. So there are pressures from investors, there are pressure from shareholders, there are pressures from regulatory bodies. From all over, the businesses are going to face more and more pressure in the ESG arena from now on?
I think one of the things that I'm also hearing too is that there is not a single definition of what corporate social responsibility is that can be applied globally or even within a sphere. And I think what you see is organizations trying to take some existing efforts, so perhaps in the traditional corporate philanthropy realm, and make that sort of their mainstay part of things. You've got, as Jim was pointing out, some of the newer organizations who have the benefit perhaps of not the legacy thing, and their whole existence is built around doing things that help society move along. There are people who are looking at taking operational effectiveness measures, maybe it's carbon offset kinds of things, and sort of internal metrics of how we're doing better as an organization and how that's helping society be a better place to live. And then there's some who are actually trying to tie some of their philanthropic and other measures to their business goals, which has sort of an interesting side to it that we could probably all discuss, of whether sometimes that begins to look less altruistic and less for the social good as opposed to the personal good. But I think all of these things are within this general definition we have of corporate social responsibility, and there really isn't a clear-cut definition. So if our conversation moves around a little bit, it's because I think the field is not yet clearly defined, and the practice of corporate social responsibility can vary tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that my organization is doing, as I mentioned, I work for a construction company, and we have set some very ambitious and clear targets for reducing carbon. And Ritzi, you were talking about how this has to permeate every aspect of the organization. And
That's
for us,
right.
that's everything from finding alternatives to some cement to mix into the concrete, because cement is high in carbon. It is the materials we procure, that we buy as part of the building process, to make sure that they are low in carbon. We were involved in developing a carbon calculator for builders to use, working with a university and others. So it actually does touch pretty much every part of the organization, including, the chairs that we buy for the offices where we work. Is that really a requirement, though? I mean, is it possible for an organization to embrace a corporate social responsibility agenda that is based more on, say, what employees say interests them, or what the leaders say interests them, as opposed to the actual nature of the work that the organization does? I'm thinking, for example, of an agency, a public relations agency, a marketing agency, which doesn't actually make anything. Nothing that gets sold in stores, for example, or shipped to buyers. Is it acceptable to come up with targets for your corporate social responsibility program that are not linked directly to what the organization does?
No, there's these. I like this conversation a lot, but my main concern about how this is heading is that when you go from when you go to the stakeholder concept, it's just like everybody's equal, and so the loser in this program are the employees, because basically all of the activities are outside the company. The charity, I mean, that hasn't changed and won't change. The various things that companies do under the old regime of social responsibility is probably going to be pretty similar, but by making all the stakeholders equal, the employees tend to lose. The programs do not address aggressively enough the relationship between management and the people that work there. To my mind, and I'm about to propose actually amendment to this law in Minnesota in the next legislative session to add a special provision, what I'm calling a fourth bottom line, and that's the bottom line of integrity. We want to set up a system within the corporate structure that monitors selected but important behaviors and measures them and subjects them to the same things you've been talking about, And it's a very problematic situation because, in essence, I'm proposing something that borders on enshrining moral behaviors into law. And as I've been told relentlessly by the Minnesota's Bar Association, we prefer to have business laws be agnostic. And in our state, I think like in many states, business laws actually originate with the bar associations. In fact, in Minnesota, they have a very interesting process where if an idea comes up like mine, it's essentially doesn't even go to the reviser of statutes in the legislature. It goes to this committee who begins revising if they accept it and want to do it. They will revise the legislation. At the present time, I'm meeting a fair amount of resistance with this idea, but it is a hole in the process. And we degraded essentially the employee status by making it like any other stakeholder group. And I think we need to address that because it's another excuse to not do stuff internally to build this relationship and essentially plug employees into what's going on. They already feel like they're not plugged in, and they felt that way for decades. That this doesn't help that. So I think I'm very conversant with a number of these business companies, new corporations. So I'm actually going to propose an amendment to their legislation that requires that they set up what I call a decency charter. And this is a mutual agreement between employees and management about some fundamental things that each will do that enhance the employee status and also hold the feet to the fire of the managers and leaders of the company to things that employees have been asking for in every employee survey you've ever heard. Do I matter? I'm doing something that is important. Why can't I see the plan? What's the strategy? These are common questions employees are always asking, and employers come back with, I suppose, the Silicon Valley is the epitome of what they come back with. They do your laundry, they give you lunch, they take care of the kids, but that isn't really what employees are looking for. They want a piece of the action without necessarily having to be compensated for it. So, it's going to be interesting to see these other things that corporations are very experienced in doing. I think will certainly continue under this program, but the issue is what's new, what's really the advances that these new three-letter slogans are going to really generate.
One of the things you hit upon, though, Jim, which I think makes so much sense too, is the changing nature of organizations, the very, very, very different nature of the organizations and what it is that their service and or core product is. So, for example, the one thing that they do have in common is a group of employees, and I think there needs to be a little bit more focus in that direction. But a financial services organization, a bank that's doing some sort of corporate social responsibility is going to have a very, very different looking program than what you were talking about, for example, Shel, at Webcor, where you are making buildings. Maybe an airline, because of its very, very interesting and different structure, is going to have a way different kind of program than might a grocery store chain that is very, very embedded in local communities. So I think the nature of the programs are going to change. I do look at what are some of the constants. And I think the other piece that I would even go to talk a little bit about is the employee involvement and to what degree employees have an opportunity to be able to help direct some of this. I'm reminded years ago of watching a great IABC Gold Quill presentation around a group in South Africa that decided that they were going to do more outreach into a community, decided what it is that they needed in this community, and they went about putting together a superb program to be able to do things. And then the community didn't embrace it completely because the one thing they hadn't really done was check with the community to find out what their important needs were. So while the program was great, it didn't take off. So I think we really do need to look at the stakeholders. We do need to listen. We need to listen to what employees say is important. We need to listen to what the communities that we're trying to help are saying important. And it can't be sort of a top-down driven, boy, don't we look good, let's check the checklist, and this will make us shine.
I think, let me
I think that...
sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead, Rajeev. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
okay.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry if Ritzi. Yeah. I
No,
was
it's
going to
okay.
talk
I'll go
about.
after you.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about India. Now, we have on the one hand the UN Sustainable Development Goals laid out, by the UN, which have targets to be achieved by 2030. Now, those the Indian government has adopted them for implementation, and businesses are being encouraged to align their purpose and the area of contribution aligned with the SDGs. That is one area. Then the second unique development here in India is there is a law which has been passed which says that for companies above a certain turnover, 2% of the profits each year must go back in CSR activities. And to align those activities of the corporates, the government has given different annexures, different choices of areas where the company can contribute in accordance with its line of work, as well as its liking, as well as its potential to contribute in that area. So CSR has become a mandatory, in India. 2% of your profits have to be directed towards CSR, if you're a company above a certain size. So two benchmarks, one is the Sustainable Development Goals, which again the government is pushing forward, and secondly, the law, which makes it mandatory to spend on CSR for each company.
Ritzi?
Yeah, I believe that. Am I coming in clearly? Okay. I believe that everyone has a role to play, and that everyone has to be part of the process. So it's really not easy, and it shouldn't be that you just ram it down people's throats. So for top management, they have to buy in, they have to lead it themselves. They have to be seen visibly as really supporting it, authentically supporting it. That's one. Second is you have to have drum beaters within the company who are those who are uh, shaping the support for this CSR, if you want to call it, or most companies now call it sustainability. So I remember when we had our 2030 goals brought down to country level, in our company, we did a roadshow. But one thing good was that the company identified sustainability, in which CSR is part, as one of the four business strategies. So that was the strategy that everyone had to support, and there were KPIs, and each of the functional heads had a but the team was also encouraged to volunteer or to ask questions. And in turn, we have like what we call community organizers or CSR managers who go out to the communities where our plants are located. They would have needs assessment. So they dialogue a lot with the communities, they immerse and they stay with the communities, they're involved, they know what's important to them, so that there is a great synergy. So in fact, when, for example, if we have plant maintenance, the CSR manager goes to the community heads and says, oh, in case you wonder why we're kind of looking busy, we're going to have plant maintenance. So it will be from this time to that time, so that there is no uh, there is no question for the community what's going on, or are you giving us extra air quality problems or some noise problems, so that they're aware. So I think that everyone really should have a stake in it, but it that's where the communication comes in. That's where the persuasive communication comes in, and you really need drum beaters to explain very well. It has to be really clear. What is this all about? Why should I do this? What's this to me? And if it's part of the KPIs, that's even better. But then again, you can't, as I said, don't ram it down their throats, win them over with why it's so important. And sometimes I find it effective if I bring it down to their personal level. Say, I would say in our language, Filipino, I said, what are you going to do with profits if you do not have a an earth to live on. So then they start thinking, and then we go over. So it's an opener, and then we go over what they do, and then we help them look into things. I remember we had templates that we had to ask them to fill out on water usage. For a moment, they said, "Why should I do this? This is extra work." Until we went to them and explained why this is so important, and if they had problems with water, what was the impact on operations, on our budgets, etc., etc. So it really takes time and drum beats. I believe in building a network of support. It really just can't be something that appears in the press release. And for me, as a comms head, before it goes out to the public, I tell the internal guys first. I tell them, we're going to come out with this press release. It's going to appear more or less in these newspapers or online publications. Can you support it? And if you see it, can you forward it or share it or post it on your site? They have to really feel they're part of the process. And the communities as well, because we want them to support us on their own. I mean, not being forced to support us, but we want them to say, there's a problem, that we want them to say, no, that's not the way the company operates. I should know. I live right next to them. So we want them to be there. We build the bridges, but it takes time. It takes a lot of people's skills. It needs clear communication, trust, and consistency.
At the IABC World Conference a couple of years ago, we had a keynote speaker. I can't remember his name. Brad, you probably introduced him over the PA system, so maybe you do. But he talked about a program at the company that owns the Verizon retail operation, the stores where they sell the phones. And what this program entailed was filling backpacks with school supplies to give to underprivileged school children. The number of backpacks that they donated was tied entirely to revenue. So the more product the employees moved, the more backpacks they could donate. The way he told it, the employees were very, very motivated to distribute as many backpacks as they could. And therefore, there was this synergy between how hard they worked to move that product and how many backpacks they could fill and give out. Is that a reasonable approach to CSR, to engage employees by getting them to work harder in order to reach targets that kick in various levels of giving? Well, next
that's
question.
a great question.
I just remembered something when you said
What's interesting to
backpacks.
me is
Because
that in our in the sort of the U.S. culture,
backpacks.
where
Because
I'm
I
hearing
think
people trying to differentiate between what this means that's new and what they're already doing, because this is a lot of this giving is really embedded in the culture of, let's see, at least larger American companies. And so the energy is being, as I'm seeing it, is coming more from these new companies being formed for this new purpose. And in fact, the University of Minnesota's business school, it's called the Carlson School, but now it's called, they have a subtitle to the school saying, doing business for good. I'm sure they feel good about that, but I don't know that their academic program has changed to accommodate what we're talking about here today necessarily. It's a great slogan, and there are the new people coming along with these new companies are clearly dedicated to this, discussing the issues that really face us in our culture and that sort of thing. But it's interesting to me again that all the things we're talking about are things that are pushed outside of the organization. Working harder to give packaged school backpacks to kids is a good idea, but what are we doing about the kids of the families that work in the company? What are we doing about their education? What are we doing about keeping these people, employed? And now we're going to go through this tremendous adjustment, perhaps, from being isolated for a year And that has a different dynamic. Brad, you were talking about that earlier. There is going to be some major change in those circumstances. And the issue becomes, again, what do we do when everybody's dispersed like this, but the emergency no longer exists, but we decided to go in this direction?
So one of the big mistakes that you make when you choose what to do in a CSR program is not to do research on what exactly does the community or the underprivileged or any section of the population requires. And when you don't do that and you start imposing what your ideas are, you can go wrong. You may look good to do that because it is some kind of activity, and it's kind of philanthropic, it's social, it serves a purpose. But if the audience doesn't need that proves to be a failure and a waste of money. So a lot of research has to go into what exactly are the development needs of a population, and then decide how can a company align its activities to fulfill that purpose. And it must be aligned with the company's purpose. It must somehow link back to what they are strong at and what they can do.
And I'll take in a little bit too. I think one of the things that we are hearing as a sort of a theme throughout all this is that metrics are important. You need to measure, whether it's to be able to prove to a government organization that you are delivering a certain percentage of things, or maybe you have sustainability goals to accomplish and you have to measure certain things. So we are hearing the critical nature of doing metrics. I think we're also hearing this concept that this better take into account what it is that employees are feeling. It was, by the way, Shel, it was a guy by the name of Ryan McCarty, who was the closing speaker, who finished up the IABC conferences in Montreal. Great presentation. But I think you hit upon an important one in asking that question. I'm sure the recipients of all of these backpacks in school systems were delighted to see it. When it starts looking as if it's somehow tied to, there was performance goals internally for the organization, what they could afford, and there is that reality of the better we do, the more we can afford to give, which is sort of true even with the 2% kind of thing. If our revenues are such and such, we can afford to do and fund our program at this level. I think what happens is that oftentimes an external audience, when they hear of something like that, and even an internal one, gets to be a little bit suspicious. One of the other things, though, I think that is really critical is when you start looking at the overall program, how watered down does it become? I think there's great examples of people who have programs in place where employees are allowed to direct sort of some of their gifts and have matching funds from an organization to be able to support philanthropic causes. And you sort of wonder, how broad spread? Are we helping the arts? Are we helping the humanities? Are we helping social groups that benefit individuals? Are we helping? And so at a certain point, you need to help at the very, very outset, I think, as an organization, come up with here's what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And then I think also I caution people from becoming too closely tied to the business goals of the organization, just because if it looks as if you're doing that to get something in return, a quid pro quo of some sort, people look quite askance at your motivation for wanting to get involved in whatever endeavor.
Ritzi, would...
Yeah, sorry, something with my connection. So I was able to restart my modem. Anyway, I go back to the backpack because we used to run a scholarship for children from marginalized families in areas where the company would operate. So more than just giving them backpacks, because you see, it was a national, we had plants all over the country. So it would mean that there was a logistical expense and concern to say, bring all the backpacks coming from Metro Manila and flying it back to all the provinces where it had to be distributed. So instead, what we thought of was a social enterprise. So we looked into these children and looked into the what were their parents doing. So most of their moms were stay-home moms. So we gave them opportunities to make the backpacks, saw the uniforms. As long as there was a standard, we had somebody guiding them how to make socks and all that, so that the things that their children were using came from them, so they had to make it well. And then, so each kid got a backpack with all the things that their moms helped put together. And then we realized that these kids would walk to school and walk home. They had to cross the road. Some were primary students with just themselves crossing the road, which was quite unsafe. And safety was our overarching value. So we tied it in with safety. We said maybe we could put something on the back of the backpack that you could see as a motorist, because they would cross the street and they would walk on the sides of the road to get to their homes. So we said that that could be one of the safety objectives also. Safety not only of our people, but of the constituents and those who live in the areas. And that helped a lot, because we found out that if you bring in now the families of the children, so the children will be the primary beneficiary times what we call the indirect beneficiary or cohort. So then perhaps in one household, you have one goodwill for maybe four other people, four adults maybe, or maybe even more kids. So then you have a multiplier effect of the goodwill that your company brings from a simple thing as a backpack, or a simple thing as the child goes to school, so he's your scholar, but he hasn't had a good meal. So how can he concentrate? So we again engage the parents to have vegetable gardens in their respective areas. They would cook meals, so we taught them nutrition. There was a nutritionist. And who would eat the meals? Their children. So we funded initially, we made an initial fund, but soon they were able to generate their own. It became some kind of a social enterprise. So I loved visiting these communities, because I'd go talk to the parents, talk to the students, and really meet them up. And I remember we had to organize the parents so that they would encourage the students to study. And it was really fulfilling. I had one student, scholar, and she became an honor student, and there were many more like her. So I think part of this CSR is not just, the numbers, the KPIs, but it's really going down to the people, and they remember. And they toured me around the school and said, "Look, this is from your company. Are you from the company?" So there was this goodwill, and that's what we'd like to embed. And for all you know, these children, one day, someday, are going to be engineers, and then maybe they will want to work with our company, and they're going to do a good job, because they'll say, "This company sent me to school." So these are investments, and these are just not CSR greenwashing, but this is really investing in people, which is really more sustainability oriented actually. But it starts with good intentions, and then it's not it's you have to put in your money. Like if you say, "I want to help develop the biodiversity," you have to be ready with an amount, and you have to put your money where your mouth is. Am I saying it correctly? But you have to, and then you tell the story. Tell the story to your employees, make them proud, make them visit the place, take take pictures, use it in your sustainability report, make videos. I would go around to the communities and show the biodiversity in different areas, showing our employees holding these animals. And that just kind of brings people together. And I think that's where communication comes in. We build the bridges and let the engineers, be really good in building, but we bring in the heart.
Well, let me expand on that with the next question. A couple of years ago, there was a book written by a fellow named Robert Phillips. He had been president of Edelman in EMEA, and the book was called "Trust Me, PR is Dead." And his argument was that PR is all about addressing a company's failures, making them look good when they had done something bad, and that as organizations got woke, I guess you would say, and started behaving the way they should and make these investments in the environment and in society, they wouldn't need PR anymore. My argument with that is that if every company is doing good, how do the stakeholders find out about that? It doesn't just organically happen. PR has a role. Communications has a role. In addition to, Ritzi, what you were just talking about, how would you define the role of communications in the work of corporate social responsibility, and how do you avoid making it look like all you're doing is tooting your own horn?
When the community sees that you are sincere, when you go there and sit with them in the same atmosphere, when you eat their food, when you treat them not like recipients, but as peers, they know that, they feel that. We had one community where they were time survivors. Their houses were flattened. They had they lost everything. And so we helped them build 100 homes. However, we didn't build it for them. They built it themselves. We just taught them how to make the roof. We had others to come in to help them too. We had the local government helping them. We had the Red Cross helping them. We had social services helping them. Of course, we had to bring in the mayor, the vice mayor, and all the local officials to support. But the greatest thing about it was this, but we had a community organizer to work with them to teach them values so that there would be peace and order in the community. It took time. It took like 2 years to do this, but it was worth it. And then I would go there from time to time because this was in a rebel-infested area. So you just don't go there. You go there with some security, or you ask security to clear the area first. And when they say, it's okay, you can go, you go there with some nondescript security people. So you go there, but you meet the people and it's so nice. They never asked anything from us. And during the anniversary of their 1 year, they invited us over and they gave us giveaways they made from their homes. The food they let us eat came from the plants they planted. And they had, a program and all that. So I think the fulfillment of it is you have to be patient. You have to set your targets. You have to make sure you have enough resources, but get partners in. And there's a process of development anyway that you follow. And then make sure you touch base really with them. It's something I can't describe, but there's just this feeling of knowing each other. So sometimes we still keep in touch, and they're very simple folk. They're so far away from what we have in the cities, but they're happy. And I think that's one thing that you want to see. Your company achieved its KPI. You did your part as head. Your guys in the plant are involved and helping them. And the people who you help don't see themselves as mere recipients or beneficiaries. They feel that they had sweat equity in it. And they are happy. I think is it Nepal that has, or the happy quotient? I think it's something, but it just can't happen overnight. No, it takes a lot of people skills. And that is part of public relations, which is relationship building based on trust and truth. And you have to sit with them. I mean, literally. If you go to their place and they offer you water, take it. They feel offended if you don't take what they offer. Take it and then appreciate it and truly appreciate it. And they become you become friends. And then
I think Ritzi's hit on something really important, though, too. If an organization really thinks that sort of dropping something in one time, washing our hands of things as one and done and taking credit for it. That's not really the kind of sustainability. That's not kind of the relationship. No. And if the communication is, look how good we are, and that's all, it's wrong. Yeah. I think communication's role really is, if you're building relationships, you also need to have a two-way conversations, that listening to the needs, also responding to the needs, yes. Offering thanks, and also being kind enough to say thank you. I've seen so many philanthropy organizations who, or corporate philanthropy though, make a donation of some sort, and there are ongoing needs. They're sort of satisfying one part of the equation, but not necessarily the whole thing. So to the degree that PR is seen in sort of that old school model of fixing something as one time, as opposed to an ongoing presence, the building the relationship, the having the conversation, yeah, it should be dead, because there is a need for a deeper amount of communication that takes place, that's going on beyond the one-time gift.
Okay, Shel.
I also found that if you, just an addendum, if they are part also of, if there are problems and you ask them to suggest solutions, they feel part of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Rajeev?
Yeah. Okay. So I was this question which Shel has put. It's an interesting dilemma that and both individuals and corporates face this dilemma, that when you do a noble deed, how much to publicize it? And many corporates are also very shy of. They say, okay, it's in our nature to do good, so we will do good. We don't need to communicate what we are doing. And similarly, individuals also face this challenge. But generally, what has been seen is that what is important is to have an ongoing dialogue with stakeholders. That becomes very critical, and a very transparent, ongoing dialogue with stakeholders, telling them what you're doing and why you're doing it and with what end in mind. Now, research has shown that you don't need to be very overt and aggressive in CSR communication strategies. Sometimes a minimalist and sometimes a very subtle and understated approach in communicating CSR proves to be much more effective in the long run. And what can destroy your credibility and reputation is, of course, if there is a dissonance between what an organization does and what it communicates. So you have to be very authentic and have good intentions, but let people know that you are doing that certain activity in a certain manner with a certain end in mind, without being too overtly aggressive about that communication. That's the key.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you hit upon, Rajeev, that I'm reminded of a lesson that I learned a long time ago, was sometimes instead of the donor taking credit for having made a donation of equipment, of money, whatever, to the organization, often it's in the best interest of the organization to announce that we are pleased to announce that we received a gift of such and such, whether it's equipment or donation, services, good, whatever, from so-and-so, in large part because that also helps them attract other gifts. So instead of doing the self-serving, look how good we are because we gave, it's a little bit better position for both organizations to let the recipient acknowledge the gift as opposed to the giver.
I agree. Brad, that's a good idea. Yes.
I think, that the when you talk about getting the word out, so to speak, the leadership of the organization plays a really important role in this. A lot of these programs appear to be run by folks in the middle somewhere who are assigned this task, and the people who really have a real impact on the culture of the organization. And part of these things we're talking about is making them a part of the culture of the organization who's doing them, which is where I think the connection with employees really comes in. But I think leadership plays a really important role, just as it does in establishing the behaviors within the company and the things that are expected of individual leaders and groups. as they represent the company and as they represent things to themselves. To me, when you talk about getting the word out, the first thing I think of is who's the best audience in the first place are the folks who work there and who have neighbors and who have friends and who have contacts of their own.
Yeah.
And building them into this base of communication, like a political campaign, is a base for you to work from. For those who may not be working in that particular project, but they're aware of it and they know people who are. But that makes the leader of the organization and the leadership of the organization really have a responsibility to be talking about these things the way I hear you all talking today, because that's going to spread the enthusiasm and validate this extra work that people are going to.
There is
I
one
agree,
way.
Jim. The top level is very important.
There is one way to get the word out, and that is through an annual report. There are a lot of organizations now that are producing an ESG annual report, which is packed with data showing the progress that the organization has made toward achieving its KPIs. But there's also a trend toward what's known as integrated reporting, which means that the ESG report is woven into the financial annual report that organizations produce. Is this a good idea, or is it a better idea to shine a light on your CSR activities with a discrete standalone publication?
See, the world over, there is a challenge where people want a standardized format of reporting. You have today multiple formats. One is the GRI, one is what you're calling of the IIRC integrated reporting. Then there is the SASB, and each one has got different data points. What the challenge is today in ESG reporting is that there is no universal standard that has come up, and research is still on, and many institutions in Europe and the US are collaborating together to build some kind of universal standardized formats. What is important in this reporting is the principle of materiality. What is really material to a certain corporate may not be material to the other corporate, so it has to vary with context. The reporting has to vary with the kind of work that the corporate is involved in, and this is going to be a challenge. The more problematic is the data accuracy in the reports as well as the relevance. So comparability becomes very, very difficult between one company and the other. And this is what the challenge is. Ongoing research is going on to standardize the procedures. But the fact remains that if a company wants to really do a reporting, it can benchmark for itself from where it is and where it has reached, without resorting to comparing with the other standards which are available. So I think it brings in a certain structure. When you have these reporting frameworks, you have a certain way of a checklist to go through, and you ensure that every organ of your organization is working towards a certain goal in a unified, synchronized manner. So these reporting frameworks definitely prove to be very advantageous by any company.
Yeah, I think the annual report or integrated report, whatever it is that works for the company, is also a direction of top management. So usually sometimes the CEO prefers it in a certain way. So so you as the comm person you're going to carry it through. But I think for whatever report that is that any company does, and I think whatever it is, it always has to be an authentic. So the amount of disclosure has to be compliant. It has to be authentic, and the focus on who are they doing it for should be there. I've seen companies that separate their annual report, and then they separate the sustainability report. I've seen others also who, before the sustainability report, would come out with some kind of a more feature-like CSR. I've seen others also that do not anymore come out with a fancy annual report. They just do the standard report that the Securities and Exchange Commission requires. So I guess it also depends on what the CEO and management requires, aside from compliance. But for me, it's got to be authentic, got to be accurate, and it's got to be honest. Because nowadays, whatever we say publicly is already seen almost everywhere, especially with digital and online.
And that will take us to the top of the hour and the end of this discussion. I want to let everybody know about the next Circle of Fellows for April. Will be on April 15th, which here in the U.S. we normally would say is tax day, but we just learned that it has been moved to May as a result of the pandemic. I would love to tell you what time it's going to be at. Don't know yet. It was scheduled for 6 p.m. because we had a participant from Australia who just today let us know that he was not going to be available. We may find somebody from the UK and have to shift that. So keep an eye out for the time on April 15th. But the topic is return on investment for communication. Which I think is a vital topic for communicators. And the three confirmed participants we have for this panel are Diane Gajewski, Jim Schaefer, and Angela Sinicus, and a player to be named later. I want to thank our panel today. It was a terrific conversation. I think we barely scratched the surface. I think I got through less than half of the questions that I had on my list, and appreciate your time and the great information that you shared. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.